This is Pastor Keith with Progressive Movement Towards Christ Church, and I'm here to give you a sermon today called John's Death. But before I get to the sermon, I want to just let you know you can hear us on iHeartRadio, Google+, SoundCloud.com, Spreaker.com, and, of course, you can hear us on Apple Podcasts or any other venue that you listen to. You can see us there. Now, I'm going to be talking in Matthew 14. Matthew 14, and again, my sermon is about John's death. And John was a very important man. John the Baptist was a very important man. But, you know, King Herod, Governor Herod at that time, heard reports about Jesus, and he told his attendants that John the Baptist had been raised from the dead. That is why the powers of performing miracles are at work in him. And that's what the governor said, Herod, the governor. But let's start in Matthew 14 and 1. At this time, Herod, the governor, heard the reports about Jesus, and he said to his attendants that John the Baptist, he has been raised from the dead, and that is why the powers of the performing miracles are at work in him. So, you know, Herod decided that too many people were following John the Baptist, and John the Baptist, of course, followed Jesus, and of course, Jesus was the Son of Man. So, in 3 it says, "For Herod had arrested John and bound him and put him in prison to stow him out of the way on account of and for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife." Now, you know, she was afraid of God. She was afraid of the Jews. She was afraid of the Word. She was afraid that Jesus was spreading too much of the Word, and that John the Baptist baptized Jesus. And John the Baptist, of course, was a faithful man of God. And so the wife Philip's wife decided that she wanted him in prison. As Herod decided that, well, I'll put him in prison. And in 4 it says, "For John has said to him, it is not lawful or right for you to have her." You know, and that was right. That he did an unjust thing, and it wasn't right that he had his brother's wife. But that was what happened. And although he wished to have him put to death, he was afraid of the people, for they regarded John as a prophet. Now, the Jewish people believed that John was a prophet, you know, and they didn't. He was afraid. Herod was afraid that if he came out and killed John, had him killed, then the people would rebel against him. The Jewish people would rebel against him because he was known as a prophet of God by the people. And, of course, we know that John the Baptist was favored by God and did God's work, and he baptized many, many people in God's name, and that's why they called him John the Baptist. Now, John didn't do anything wrong. He didn't break any laws, but, you know, Herod did. So he confined John and put him in jail because of a relative's whim. And you know, back in those days, what the governor, what the king, whoever it was in power, said happened, and that's what happened to John, poor John. Now, we're going to, for 3 said, for Herod had arrested John and bound him and put him in prison, stole him away on account sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. And John, of course, it is not lawful or right for you to have her. You know, and he was against Herod because Herod did a bad thing, you know. And so John decided that he would tell Herod what he did. Now, and 5 says, although he wished to have him put to death, he was afraid of the people, of course. And 6, but Herod's birthday came. The daughter of Herodias danced in the midst before the company and pleased and fascinated Herod. He was fascinated by her dance. And because of that, the governor, Herod, decided to give her and grant her whatever she may ask. And 7 it says, and so he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. And that was a powerful, it's almost like a wish. He whatever she wanted, of course, Herod would grant it because he was so fascinated by her dancing. And so in 9 it says, well, in 8 it says, and she being put forward and prompted by her mother said, give me the head of John the Baptist right here on a platter. Now, the mother is the one that pushed her daughter into wanting John the Baptist's head on a platter. Now, I don't know. She may have had a different wish, a different want, but her mother pushed her into saying, I want John the Baptist's head on a platter. And the king, of course, was still afraid of the Jewish people, the people that believed that John the Baptist was indeed a prophet, because he did prophesy in his journeys. So they liked him and wanted him to live. But, the King Herod was a weak man to me. I mean, the governor Herod was a very weak man to me, because he did whatever other people asked of him with really no regards for the truth, no regards for how guilty John the Baptist was. He just did what he wanted at his whim. Now, in 9 it says, and the king was distressed and sorry, but because of his oaths and his guests, he ordered it to be given to her. So he ordered that John the Baptist be beheaded and put his head on a platter. But he was distressed and sorry, but because his oath and in front of his guests, he couldn't back down. He couldn't say, no, I don't want to do this, because the Jewish people get angry at me. And he didn't want to say this to his guests, because he was the ruler. He was the authority. He was the man that made the decisions. So he had to honor his oath because he had given it to her. Now, in 10 it says, he sent and had John beheaded in prison. Now, John was beheaded in prison, and he shouldn't have been, because he did not break any laws. Just like people say, hey, I'm in prison and I didn't commit the crime. Well, that's true. There are people in jail that didn't commit the crime that they were sent to prison for. I heard a story about a man. He was in prison for 30 years for killing someone, and with the new DNA information, they found out that he wasn't even at the scene. A lot of men get released because of DNA and tests that they have today that they didn't have back then, and were found innocent. And I've heard of people say, well, the witnesses against him decided years later, months later, whatever, and said it wasn't him. I don't really think it was him. I just said it because the newspaper told me, and that's the story of man, walking blindly and believing everything they hear, and they even have cops putting evidence on someone that they believed was guilty, but actually wasn't, but they knew the man was going to get away with it, so they did it anyway. So there's lots of things that happen to put innocent people in jail, and no matter what they say or do, they're going to jail. They're going to that little cell, and they're going to live there for whatever the sentence was. Now, after he was beheaded, his head, in 11 says, his head was brought in on a platter and given to the little maid, and she brought it to her mother, because the mother requested her to do this, so she brought the platter to her mother. Now, of course, the mother's probably joyful, because another one of the prophets or people that followed Jesus, of course, another Jewish man was killed, so she was thankful that Herod did what she had asked. Now in 13 it says, when Jesus heard it, he withdrew from there privately in a boat to a solitary place, but when the crowds heard of it, they followed him by land on foot from the towns. And Jesus wanted a solitary place where he can think and he can mourn, and he could think of the tragedy this was, and that a friend of his, John the Baptist, who honored him, blessed him, praised him, was now dead. So on 14 it says, when he went ashore and saw a great throng of people, he had compassion, pity, and deep sympathy for them and cured their sick. So Jesus was healing the sick because he had compassion and pity and deep sympathy for them because they were in mourning because of John's passing. And I'm going to tell you this, we all mourn when someone passes, of course, but we know John the Baptist went to heaven from his prison, so his soul went to heaven. That's what we want to do. We want to go to heaven and be by God's side. But it was too early for him to pass. But because of, prejudice and the Gentiles and the Jews fighting, and it just happened. It happened, and it couldn't be stopped. But Jesus was in another place, and so John the Baptist died in prison. So when people die, remember, we must celebrate their death because we know they're going to the kingdom of God and not down the hell. So we celebrate, we mourn, of course, in our own ways, but we celebrate our friends, our family's death because that's the proper thing to do, because now they're looking down on us from heaven and they have no pain. They hear no trials, no tribulations. They're living in God's warmth in their mansion. And God, I just want to be there with you. So I hope everybody agrees with me that that's the better place to be than this sinful, meat-filled earth. And this is Pastor Keith from Progressive Movement Towards Christ. You can see all our sermons on www.movementtowardschrist.com. That's www.movementstowardschrist.com. We'll see you again for our next sermon, and I hope you join us and listen, and you invite your family and friends to listen also. May God be the glory, and glory be to God.